I'm going to dive right into our presentation. I guess the image is up on screen, and I'm going to begin with really kept as one integrated whole because of the family, because of the grandsons, Joseph and George Wirsching. It is absolutely my pleasure, and I would like to thank you once again for holding on to this history, which is an incredible one, as you will see as we go along. Now, the story of the Bombay Talkies with us, that is the Alkazi Foundation, began about 6 years ago. And I would have to say that it is through the participation and the collaboration of many institutions that we managed to, I think, bring this archive to light, of course, with all of you, and to think about what a collaboration in the way that the Bombay Talkies intended it really means in our present day, in our times, to come together in a collegiate manner, in a collective manner. And so we did our first exhibition, I would say, with the Serendipity Arts Foundation in Goa in 2017. And subsequently, this exhibition traveled around to the Lalit Kala Academy in Chennai in partnership with the Goethe Institute, the German Cultural Center, of course. And then subsequently came to New Delhi. I'm only showing you images right now of the show as it happened in Goa. But subsequently came to Delhi to a gallery called Art Heritage, which is the sister concern, of course, of the Alkazi Foundation for the Arts. Now, what's been fascinating for us is that this whole publication was drawn around the archive, of course, of German cinematographer Josef Wirsching, and the dedicated book that we have has been edited by Debashri Mukherjee, who is an associate professor at the University of Columbia and focuses extensively on cinema studies. The publication that we bring to you, of course, what we're showing you on screen is not our book. It is Debashri's other book, which was published last year with Columbia University Press, but I thought it would come to light because she is really the fulcrum, the center, based on which this entire enterprise has come together, and I would really like to acknowledge her. Sadly, she could not be with us today because of term time responsibilities in the United States at the university. But the book has many authors. So we have Sudhir Mahadevan, an associate professor at the University of Washington. We have Priya Jayakumar from the Department of Media Studies in the University of Southern California. We have Rachel Dwyer, Professor Emerita from SOAS. We have with us also Allana Halsel, noted film historian, as well as an interview with Veerchand Dharamse, an eminent researcher and scholar of the silent film era, of course, done by Kaushik Bhaumik, interviewed by him. And I believe we have Rachel Dwyer in the house, and we would like to thank you once again for being here. And there you are, please be acknowledged. It is absolutely a pleasure to see you, and it is a pleasure to introduce this book to you as well right now. As someone interested in the history of photography, I was really curious, and I believe that this footage that you all have, the material that you all have in your archive, which is taken on a Leica camera in the 1930s, might well have been the first 35mm material that has been shot in India. I'm not sure about this, but it might well be. I haven't seen anything earlier than this. Now, the Leica camera, of course, comes about in 1925 at the Leipzig Fair. But what I was interested also was that this is a time of great transmedia. This is the time that in Stuttgart you have a fascinating exhibition called Film and Photo that transpires in 1929, approximately the same time as all of this activity is happening in India with the Wirsching archive and the family. Now, one of the other very interesting things that we have is, of course, material from the Light of Asia that you will hear about. The first, as it were, film shot on location that Joseph and George will talk about. But of course, in the archive, our archive, that we have in New Delhi, we have the antiquarian book from 1879, which is a book written in verse by Edwin Arnold that was translated into the film Light of Asia. And what I find fascinating about this book is that there are an incredible amount of images that are translated, of course, transformed into engravings that are made by an artist called Hamza Kar. Now, Hamza Kar is this elusive British artist, I believe, who converts to Islam following the First World War. And he actually ends up making some of these, well, almost all of these images within the publication. But he's interesting because he also is a portrait painter. He's a court painter, as it were. He lives his life between Britain and Egypt, and he is the first person to sketch the interior of the tomb of Tutankhamun when it is discovered in 1922, something that is illustrated in 1923 in the London Illustrated News. He is also someone who makes illustrations for the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam for the first time. But what's interesting is that his life transformed and it veers towards the theater, it veers towards the stage, and he then ends up becoming a stage designer and a scenographer for two of the major West End plays in Britain, The Green Hat by Michael Allen, and also the tropical scene of Somerset Maugham's The Moon and Sixpence, which is based on the life of Paul Gauguin. But enough about Hamza Kar. We come back to this fascinating archive, which is in timeline. I was always interested in the converging timelines of the Wirschings. And of course, this is the time of another very interesting German architect who comes to India, Eckhard Muthesius, and who works extensively for the Maharaja of Indore, Yashwant Rao Holkar. This is also the time, approximately this time, 1922, of the incredible Bauhaus show that happens in Shantiniketan. Right? So we're looking at great transnationalism. We have a transnational brood, as it were, over here sitting right next to me. Their story, their family history is fascinating. And what I was interested in was also talking about the time of reportage, the time of this history. It segues into national history. We have this fascinating archive of the Congress Party album taken in the 1930s of the Desh Sevikas, who are the first, as it were, the women's group of the Congress Party that brings to light, that pickets, a great extent and sort of brings to light the civil disobedience movement in a very, very interesting way. Now, I'm going to move on very, very quickly. This is one of the stills from the films that Josef Wirsching shot. And what I was interested in is that though this is the time of a great kind of Swadeshi modernism, you also have, to a great extent, a German expressionist point of view that comes into play within the images. This is also the time, I would say, that Fritz Lang is showing his film, Woman on the Moon, in Berlin. And this is also the time, approximately, when Jawani Ki Hawa is brought to life to the Indian film theatre. Now, we were talking earlier, and I was interested to know that Jawani Ki Hawa was actually shown at the Imperial Theatre in Bombay, which itself has an interesting history. The Imperial Theatre in Bombay was actually a theatre. They had plays and performances, but on the other hand, they also showed films. I was interested in this fact because soon this theatre that was on Churni Road was shut down because they couldn't actually extend the lease. Eventually, they reopened on Lamington Street, and there was, I think, a unicorn and a lion that sort of led you through the front passageway. And of course, on the left, because this was imperial time, they had God Save the King engraved on the wall. But of course, what was interesting is that this theatre was subsequently called Swastik, subsequent to, well, independence in 1947. So the Wirschings, like other Germans, they were not like other Germans, of course. They lived their lives subsequent to the Second World War. After great trial, continued to live their lives in India. But of course, subsequently what happened to independence was that there was an opening out. We find this through the Family of Man exhibition that travels in Bombay. There was a move towards isolationism. There was a move towards a kind of humanitarian point of view. There was, of course, even though these things were in play, this was a time of idealism, but it also suffered other realities. There was war, there was famine, there was partition, and all of this also becomes part of the growing film industry, the movement of actors, of writers, of musicians from India and Pakistan. Devika Rani, also the grand niece of Tagore, as you can see on the left-hand side, eventually moves on in her own way by marrying Svetoslav Rurik, the son of Nicholas Rurik. And of course, the rest is history, as they say. So, I come back to this moment. You can increase the volume just a little bit. 6 years ago, right? Which brought us to the Wirsching family doorstep. The inception of this book, which, as I said, happens because of the editor Debashri Mukherjee, because of your work, your collective work. And I have to say, it also comes together because of the binding spirit of Rosamma, your mother, and Peter, your father. It is, I think, a really interesting and an important family initiative. This is a family heirloom, this is a family history, and it is certainly part, I believe, of our nation's history. The making of cinema, the making of film, what we understand of Bollywood today actually comes about through the very making of the Bombay Talkies. So without any further delay, I would like to hand the mic over to Josef Wirsching, the namesake of his grandfather, to take us through some of the images from the Josef Wirsching archives. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Rahaab. First off, I'd like to say it's extremely serendipitous that we're here in Jaipur, because 98 years ago, my grandfather came to Jaipur to film a movie, The Light of Asia. He was a guest of the Maharaja of Jaipur, and the Maharaja gave the entire kingdom to film, to make this film, and everything from locations to people, like the citizens of Jaipur were also part of this movie. So coming back here after 98 years to launch this book, which is about the work my grandfather has done here in India, right, is something which is very special. And I'd like to thank the Al-Qazi Foundation for finding us and working with us to do this, and Mappin for printing it. So I'd like to keep this very short, because my brother will give you most of the details that happened. But I'd like to talk a little bit about my grandfather. My grandfather was a very simple, shy man. And when he was a child, he was, well, groomed to take over the family business, which was a theater business. So my great-grandfather wanted him to, study art and architecture and take over the family business. My grandfather, well, he kind of did this until he was 16 years old. And then something very, a turning point happened in his life where he was given his first camera. And that was it. He never looked back. He fought with my great-grandfather. He insisted that he wanted to go and study film, and, pushed it in such a way that finally my great-grandfather relented, allowed him to go and study. He studied at Blau-Weiss and then joined America. And then this opportunity came to America from Himanshu Rai. He was basically hunting for a team to shoot The Light of Asia. And he went to the English. They were all very sweet. They gave him some nice words and saying, very encouraging, but we can't help you. Until he came to Germany. So when he came to Germany and Melka, they did a 50-50 deal. They said, we will provide you all the technical things that you require. You have to handle all the other expenses, locations, everything. And in order to do the split amicably, the Imelka would hang on to the rights for Europe, America, and that part of the world. Whereas the India and Southeast Asia rights would go to Himanshu Rai. The film was shot here, and there was a lot of firsts about this. I mean, this was the first collaboration of an Indo-German nature. That's the first thing. The second thing is, this movie was shot entirely on location. This wasn't shot in a studio. The actors were actual Indians. At that point of time, we had movies that were made where to show a native, they would blackface a white actor. But here, the actors were Indians. The whole place, wherever they shot, were live locations. It wasn't built, it wasn't a set or anything. So because of this, this showed the grandeur of the movie, which made it a runaway success in Europe. Unfortunately, in India, slight difference. People were not interested in the movie so much because of something as simple as, why didn't they get Buddha to act? This is not the Bodh Gaya temple. This is a Jaipur. This is not a temple in Bodh Gaya. This is not even the palace of Bodh Gaya. So this is definitely not kosher. Didn't do very well in India, but did amazingly in Europe. So with this, my grandfather came down to India, shot the movie, went back, and they saw that he did quite a lot of good work. So in 1927, they sent him off on a journey. They had two Mercedes-Benz experimental vehicles where they drove from Munich to Genoa, jumped on a steamer, went to Alexandria, and then through from Egypt all the way through Syria, Afghanistan, Persia, the whole lot, down to India. They drove down to Bombay and then drove up to Calcutta. And then from Calcutta, they had to ditch the cars because they had to continue on to Rangoon. They ditched the cars, and then by cart, donkey, horse, river boat, any means possible, they went through the whole of the northeast of India, through Mandalay, all the way down to Rangoon. This is another story that we will come to later. After this, my granddad went back, and then this is where the germ of the idea of coming back to India to do something started. Because three things happened when he'd come here. On his first journey to India, the chief astrologer of the Maharaja of Jaipur goes up to him, welcomes him with open arms, and says, "Welcome home, Nawab." My grandfather was a German man, so getting information like this, he was like, "I am not a Nawab, I'm a German." The second time this happened was when he crossed over from the northeast province towards Punjab. A palmist that was walking with him saw him. He said, "You have a beautiful aura, can I look at your hand?" And then he said, "Welcome home, Sahib. This is your home." And he said, "I'm a German." The third time this happened during the journey was when he was in Benares. And he was taking pictures, and he saw an Aghori that caught his eye. And he took pictures of this man, and he followed him, and he asked him if he could do a portrait. And this man in chaste English, this is what my father told me, in chaste English told my grandfather, he says, "Welcome home. This is going to be your home for your child and your children, your child's children." So this kind of rung inside my grandfather's head, and he came back. He came back, he was given an opportunity to start the Bombay Talkies with Himanshu Rai. And he came back to India, and that started his love affair with India. He's responsible for a lot of firsts. The first Indo collaboration. The second was Mahal. Mahal was the first Gothic horror movie in India. It is also the first movie in India that has got special effects. So at this point of time, nobody even knew what VFX was, but now Marvel, they're all over the place. But at this point of time, this was the first time special effects was done in India. This was another first. The second and the third one was him shooting Pakiza. Pakiza was the first CinemaScope full in-color movie to be made in India. Of course, released much later, but the entire movie was shot in color. And they started filming towards the end of the 50s, 59. And this movie has got so many, poignant scenes. Like one is the Pangali scene, which I've seen so many cinematographers that we've met at the IFI come and say, "Man, how did your grandfather do this?" Because it's a massive set on various levels and everyone is in focus. So at that point of time, working with a new medium, with new lenses, Granddad mastered it all. And I'd like to finally close in saying that my granddad was a very shy genius. And the reason why I say this is because there was an article in the Hollywood Reporter that he was interviewed for, and the article had come out, and he left the place where the photograph is supposed to be empty. And his thing was, "I don't want to toot my own horn. I would rather have people look at my work rather than look at me as a person." And to date, all the photographs that you see here was what my brother and me have been raised on. Once in a while, my father would open the box and we'd get to see these photographs. And then the stories would come out. And for us, it used to be a magical moment. And now, more about those magical moments and the details of, I hand you to my brother, George.
So, George, you want me to advance it? You will start from here.
It's on. Hello. Thank you all for coming here and being a part of this wonderful moment in our lives, the launch of our book. And yeah, I'd just like to say it's been a real roller coaster ride for all of us. Since I started working on this collection in 2009, this collection that we have has been in our family since my grandfather's passing in 1967. And yeah, I mean, well, at that point of time, it was a sudden demise. My grandmother died of a heart attack, and then of cancer, and 2 weeks later, my grandfather died of a heart attack. And this was after 11 years of my father being in Germany. He suddenly comes to India, and then he loses both of his parents within the span of 2 weeks. And then it was just like, you know, from 67 to 72 when he got married, he was just trying to keep this collection together. And then even after that, the entire collection remained in a box, an airtight, you know, steel trunk, which we carted around. Our family traveled all over the place, from Bombay to Dubai to Nasik to Coimbatore, and then finally here in Goa. So we as kids used to keep asking Dad, it's like, what's in this box? Especially I used to keep asking Dad, what's in this box that we keep carting around? So he used to open it up occasionally and show us some of the photographs and say, well, this is your grandfather's work. He was a cinematographer. And maybe one day when you're ready, you will figure out what to do with it. So that's what's happened now. Anyways, just going back, I'd just like to give a little bit of a history of Granddad again. Well, he was born in 1903, and he studied his filmmaking at Blau-Weiss and his technical theory at the Gewerbeschule in Munich. And then after that, he joined Imelka in 1923. He came to India at the ages of Himanshu Rai in 1925 because, Himanshu Rai wanted to make a play actually on the life of Buddha, which was based on a script written by his good friend Ranjan Pal, which is again based on the book by Edwin Arnold, The Light of Asia. But they approached, they found out it was too grandiose to be, put together on a stage, so they decided to make it as a film. And then they approached studios in England, and then they said, you can't do this. So that's when he approached Imelka. So that's when they approached Imelka, and they shot the entire film in, Jaipur here. After that, they took a trip. They had to go all the way to Dehradun, mind you, to process the film, because they couldn't take the unprocessed film back to Germany. So they took a trip all the way to Dehradun. Why? Just so that they could get, clean, pure, cold water to develop the black and white film. So this is the Heikmann's Palladium in Dehradun, where they developed the entire film before they took it back to Germany. And obviously, Imelka did the entire editing, etc., of the film, put it together. Himanshu Rai retained the rights for India and Asia, while Imelka retained the rights for distribution in Europe, etc. So this is again Himanshu Rai, Renee Smith, and the German team on their way back to Germany. And now, after that, in 1935, well, the thing is, in the 30s, there was this fomenting of hatred, obviously, as you all know, in Germany with the rise of the Nazi movement. And between 1925 and 1930, Himanshu, he made a couple of other films with Franz Osten and Ufa. That was Shiraz and the Throw of the Dice. Then that was where he met Devika Rani in 1931, 31, 32, and after that they got married. And then they decided to start their own film company in India, which was initially called the Himansura International Film Talkies, which became Bombay Talkies. So this was again when he approached Imelka again, asking for technical support. So then they helped him acquire all of the equipment that he would need to start a studio, and Imelka also offered him the services of two of their best people who Himanshu had already worked with, which was Franz Osten as the director and Josef Wirsching as the cinematographer. So essentially in 1935, Bombay Talkies was instituted, and so again with Franz Osten and Josef Wirsching, they also had Wilhelm Zoller as the film laboratory technician, and also Ben Hartley as the sound editor, and Karl Graf von Spretti as the film architect and set designer. And obviously, Devika and Himanshu put together a wonderful team, because now, first and foremost, Bombay at that point of time, India at that point of time only had a few, sound, talkies studios, new theaters, Ranjit Movie Tone, some of these studios that were actually making talkies films. So the thing is, with Bombay Talkies, they literally made a filmmaking institution, because everything was under one roof. Himanshu was a wonderful, he was an excellent entrepreneur and smooth talker. He literally got funding from from quite a few of the richest businessmen in Bombay, and even got premises of F.E. Dinshaw, which was they got his huge summer palace in Malad, along with the property around it, on which they built the entire Bombay Talkies studio. The studio had everything in it. The summer palace became, his summer home rather, became the studio office. They built 3 huge sound stages. The laboratory, the premises also had a laboratory, it had a screening room, it had the medical facilities, it had a carpentry and mechanical unit for building, sets, stages, and all the other equipment that they needed. And basically everything was in-house. And all of the people that worked there were at one point of time almost about 350 to 400 people on the rolls working for Bombay Talkies. And so we're here looking at some of the initial movies. This is a shot from Jawani Ki Hawa, which is one of their first movie, which launched Bombay Talkies. And then, Bombay Talkies at that point of time wanted to concentrate more on the social agenda, the social films, so that's what they became famous for. They made movies based, concentrating on different social themes like caste system, divorce, intercaste marriage, gambling, so the ills of gambling, the ills of gossiping. So all of these things were ideas that Bombay Talkies approached in their films that they made over the span of the 20 years that they were in that they were making films. So from 1935 to, you could say, 1939, Granddad worked with the Bombay Talkies, and he made roughly about 12 films for them. And then unfortunately in 1939, as we all know, World War II broke out, and since Granddad was a German living in the erstwhile Indian province of Bombay, he was immediately interned in an internment camp in first Ahmednagar, then moved to Dehradun, and then subsequently only in 1944 he was reunited with his wife and son at the internment camp in Satara, which was set up for families. So then, over the span of the entire internment, which was from 1939 to, you could say, mid 1947, Grandad couldn't make any films with Bombay Talkies. But then an air bombing raid in 1944 destroyed Joseph's entire home and everything that he had in it in Germany. And so Joseph had nothing to go back to in Germany after the war. So basically the British offered all of the people who were released from internment. So they were all the people released from internment were either told to go back to your countries or get employment at the places where you last worked. So that's when Grandad decided to come back to Bombay Talkies, where he was essentially welcomed with open arms. And that's when he again made a few more films, but unfortunately Bombay Talkies closed down in 1954. And then he joined a company called Ama Limited, which was a company owned by W.H. Hess, which sold cine equipment. And they started an ad film unit, which made educational films, etc. So he was there from 1954 to 1958, where he shot roughly about 27 films in black and white and color. And then in 58, he was approached by Kamalam Rohi, who was again a very good friend of his, and he had already worked with Kamalam Rohi on a few films like Mahal, etc., prior to the war. So Kamalam Rohi obviously told Grandad, like, I'm starting my own studio, would you like to come over? And that's when...
Take a minute, 1 minute.
Yeah, so Grandad joined Himanshu in his new endeavor, which was Mahal Pictures, and then they made the first film, which was Dil Apna Preet Parai, which was a roaring success. Then they made another film, Daira. Then that's when Himanshu started on his Grandwa project, which was Pakiza. And then Pakiza being the film that, well, literally, you could say, killed my granddad because it was on this project that he worked for almost about, you could say, from 1959 to 1967 when he passed away. And then it took roughly about another 9 to 10 other cinematographers to complete the project which Grandad started. And then, like I said, again, going back to the collection, in 1967, after Grandad's passing, that's when Dad got the entire collection, tried to maintain it, preserve it, all of Grandad's equipment. He donated to the FTI. Unfortunately, all of that has disappeared over time. And now all that's left is the collection that we have, which consists of roughly more than about 6,000 images. Of that, we've put together this wonderful book, which has roughly about 120 images. And we've had these few exhibitions. So anyways, I think I'll just sort of wrap up. And please do go buy the book. And we also have images available as prints through our wonderful gallery, Art Heritage. So if you want to own some really excellent art prints of any of these images that you see over here, please do contact Art Heritage Gallery in Delhi, and they'll be wonderful. They'll be happy to help sort you out. So, thank you.
Thank you, George. Did you guys get all of that? There's just a few dates you had to remember here.
I just have one statement to say. You have to get the book because the cover of the book has got a scandal story. That picture you have on the cover is actually a scandal. Buy the book to find out what actually the scandal was.
Well, it's my pleasure to now have Kaushik give us some further insights. And what's interesting for me, Kaushik, at least, is when I was listening to Joseph and George, and these stories unfolded for us, as the afternoons rolled by, and as, the evening sun kind of settled. and the stories kept going, is that there's a great amount of meta history here that somehow stays out of the known history of Indian cinema, or what we understand as the macro history or the mainstream history. And I want you to respond to that, because as a professor who's also guiding students, and we talked about this a little earlier, is there an interest in that history, or what is the interest in cinema as of now? Because it has shape-shifted so extensively in the last 20, 25 years.
Thanks, Rahaab, and of course, congratulations to you and Devashree for bringing out this book, invaluable book for everyone, not just film scholars. And of course, congratulations to both the brothers for having preserved this collection against the hazards of time, which is a remarkable achievement, and for having actually catalogued it properly, which could make it accessible in a useful manner rather than just keep it stacked in boxes where we don't know what things lie in those boxes. Well, I mean, it's the Bombay Talkies story is a remarkable kind of transnational enterprise, and also the manner in which the legacy of Bombay Talkies has kind of stayed on in the very body of Indian cinema, in the images that have been produced. So first, let me just, I mean, what fascinates me about the early part of Bombay Talkies cinema is that, you know, I mean, this is a secondary history of German cinema, that is the Emelka in Munich, that comes to India. The big story is happening in Berlin, which is UFA, where, of course, Himanshu Rai goes. But the Munich studios are remarkable, I mean, for what they are doing. Alfred Hitchcock, for example, trains with Emelka, you know. And Emelka is the place where the germs of the first big spectacle that we see in Bombay Talkies is laid through these two films made by Joe Mai, called The Tiger of Eshnapur and The Indian Tomb, written by Fritz Lang's wife, Thea von Harbour, who then went on to become a Nazi collaborator, but then got married to an Indian engineer. So there are a number of stories circulating between India and Germany at this point in time. Not just this history of, you know, Emelka and then how it becomes Bombay Talkies later on, but also this engineering angle, which was very important, because there's a separate history of Indian technology and science to be written through the relationship between India and Germany. And I think, you know, part of this narrative about Austin or Wirsching, Emelka in India, is part of that larger narrative of a technology transfer that is happening through Germany rather than through England, which I think is another story which is very fascinating to kind of investigate as a context for this. Of course, there are the other things, you know, the Orientalism about Islam. If you look at the Indian Tomb, it's the making of Taj Mahal, and Shiraz, of course, is about the making of Taj Mahal. There are direct connections between the two. The cult of the Buddha in Germany and in India, there's this lost silent film about the Buddha in Germany. Few shots remain which are fascinating to watch. So multiple histories, you know, cinema, technology, also the world of Orientalism, and a different world. I mean, there are many kinds of Orientalisms, and this is a very German history which comes into India. But what happens when it comes to India, I think the brothers have emphasized the pioneering role of Bombay Talkies in setting up the first really professional studio, you know, in that sense. And of course, the technical aspect of the way in which Bombay Talkies was set up was remarkable for its time. It was a very stable kind of institution. If you look at the histories of the other early sound studios in Bombay, barring Sagar, which is also quite a pioneering studio, all of them have people coming in and going out, and there's a flux. Bombay Talkies stays with a very stable set of technicians, actors, and, you know, sets up its shop in a very professional manner with the lab, all of that in place, the sets in place, and it's a very stable unit with regular pay, which was a big thing, you know, in those days. Um, so that apart, the two things that in the time that I have, I want to focus on. One is Bombay Talkies brought in a kind of cinema. So Devika Rani, of course, has this very elite background in Bengal, having studied with Tagore and all. And so what Bombay Talkies did was bring in an elite form of nationalism, where the upper class nationalists were represented in that cinema. And they ran into trouble for that, you know. I mean, the other studios who were taking a more nationalist, autochthonous, you know, the more kind of internal identity line were critical of Bombay Talkies. So there was this famous song with Shanta Apte, who Devashri talks about in her book as well, where they lampooned that famous Ashok Kumar Devika Rani song by showing that, oh, these are elite, anglicized people playing caste, and we are the authentic people. So there was this battle. But I think Devika went ahead with that. And I think that's a very important thing for our times, to see that, you know, how cosmopolitan nationalism could lay its claim on nationalism, you know, and not just be stuck with the idea of authenticity, which I think was very important for Bombay Talkies at that point in time. That was, I think, a very important thing, you know. And this line of, you know, the struggle between the cosmopolitans and the indigenists has been a running story. And I think Bombay Talkies has a lot to tell us about the beginnings of that tension through the history of cinema, you know. It's something that we need to look at in our times in very, very important ways. The second thing is that, you know, Bombay Talkies is absolutely secular ethos, you know. I mean, people from all over the world, people from all castes and religions, and the way in which, you know, Ashok Kumar stood by Manto during the partition. A remarkable story of being extremely secular, and again, part of the global cosmopolitanism, an ethos of a global urban cosmopolitanism that they brought. I'll just finish by just saying that, you know, let's just look at the legacy of Bombay Talkies. You know, I mean, it's remarkable. You start with Bombay Talkies, and then you have people like Devanand, and then a person like Gyan Mukherjee, for example, going on to help Guru Dutt make his films. The more important line is Shashadhar Mukherjee's family that carries on to Rani Mukherjee, and all the films that are set in Kashmir and all these places that they made in the 1960s is very much a continuation of the spectacle, romantic spectacle that Bombay Talkies started. So it's a line that runs through, you know. We have Devanand, we have the 60s Shami Kapoor films, and then finishing with Nazir Hussain, who makes Yadon Ki Barat and all those films, who comes out of the same stable. So if you draw a line of genealogies that come from Bombay Talkies, it really comes down to, all the way down to the mainstream Bollywood spectacular format of song, romance, landscapes, and so on and so forth, which then leads up to a film like DDLJ, for example, where, you know, Aditya Chopra very explicitly said that he was inspired by the 1960s Kashmir films and so on and so forth. So we have this huge arc of cinematic history as well that we can follow through the Bombay Talkies lineage. And I think, unfortunately, there is not that much of interest in early cinema history now. There was a little bit 10 years back, but I think students need to go back to kind of look at these various lines, you know, the internationalism of production, the cosmopolitan nationalism, the secularity of that world, and the spectacular form of an all-India kind of, you know, narrative. I mean, look at the lyrics of the songs set in Kashmir. They're very heavily Urduized, and, you know, there's a whole culture of fusion that is going on there. So I'll stop here, you know. I mean, I think that's enough. We're running out of time.
Yeah.
And are you on the time?
Thank you so much. I mean, you know, as you were speaking, it also made me think about a little bit, and I think we just about have 5 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, for any questions that are there. But what struck me, just very, very quickly, is the kinds of images that you have in your archive. And from time to time, I often wonder about who the photographer is, because very often Josef Wirsching himself is in frame. So I think this camera is really being passed around and shared with other people on the set. And what's interesting about that is that the focus is not only on the film actors, on stardom, on star, you know, personalities, but on the people who actually make films, on the sets, on the spot boys, on the people who actually construct it, And so that sense of labor, that sense of making becomes very, very crucial to what happens or what we garner or what we get from your archive. But before we continue, I know that there are just a few questions, so let's take a few. Let's at least take one. Sorry? We are rushed out of time, I've been informed. Okay, so what we need to do, I'm really, really sorry, we don't seem to have time, but we are around for the next little while. And so we can take up your questions more informally by just being with you once we come off stage. And for the moment, what we do have to do is unveil that cover and release this book. So thank you. Come.